Welcome to Calming the Chaos, where I help you find peace in a chaotic world. I'm Tracy Cannella, licensed mental health counselor who talks about chaos from a mental health perspective. And I give you self-help resources you can use to calm your chaos in any situation in this world. Isn't this fun? It's not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy, but just a lot of helpful hints and tools. So if you're on board, feel free to tune in. And now, let the chaos begin. Well, I think I've mentioned this before on the show, but most of the people who come into my counseling office have problems with other people, whether it be with friendships or romantic partnerships or even people at work. People just seem to not be getting along with other people these days. I'm not sure if it's a trend. And a lot of it has to do with this topic of betrayal. I know I've had other relationship experts on this show before, but today I have Dr. Bruce Chalmer on here with me. He is a psychotherapist and has over 30 years treating couples and has just written a book on relationships called Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. Turmoil could possibly be substituted for chaos, because when somebody betrays you, it is often chaotic. And so now I'm going to welcome Dr. Chalmer up here. Dr. Bruce Chalmer, welcome to Calming the Chaos podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic because it continues to come up in my private practice, and betrayal and trust and that whole dynamic is something that people really have a hard time maneuvering. So it's going to be good to have a conversation. So let's have you begin with just an introduction about yourself, more beyond what I said, and then also about your topic and the book that you have written.
Well, yeah, thank you. I got into this, I think, like a lot of us in the field, initially. If you mentioned, I've been doing private practice now for a little over 30 years, and I'm in my 70s. So that means I wasn't like super young. I wasn't like right out of grad school when I started getting training in doing therapy. I was in my late 30s. I had got my PhD in psychology quite a bit earlier, but not on the clinical side. So I didn't get clinical training until later. And the reason I think it took me a while to get there is because I had to be more mature myself, and I had to go through some hard stuff in my own life. And that process of making use of therapy and seeing how amazingly powerful it could be. And it's sort of ironic because I had some really good therapists, and I had some that in hindsight were really not good therapists, but I learned a lot from everybody, and I learned a lot from those experiences. And it felt like a calling. The stuff I had done previous, I used to be a statistician back in the day. I taught courses in data communications, or in the early days of data communications. But this really felt like a calling, and I've been doing it ever since, and I just love to do it. And I gravitated toward couples pretty early on. I've seen lots of individuals too, but I especially started working with couples. There's something I've found really inspiring about being invited into people's struggles. And you mentioned, it's like, gee, it seems like everybody has trouble with other people. The old statistician in my brain, of course, says, well, I don't have a random sample of people, do I? Nobody makes an appointment with the likes of us just to tell us how well everything is going, usually. So that's, of course, we're going to see everybody's got problems. But indeed, betrayal in particular, I focused on that. I'd written a couple other books before that, but I decided I wanted to write a book about betrayal and forgiveness because it sure seems like a pretty substantial majority of the couples I work with are dealing with something that they would classify as betrayal. They're not coming to see me just because they have a few complaints. They're coming to see me because something really big happened that's really painful. And so I learned a lot. I have learned a lot and continue to learn a lot from the folks I've worked with dealing with that. And I decided I'd write a book and share some of the stuff I've learned.
That's fantastic. And you also, I forgot to mention, you do a podcast with your wife, Judy Alexander. Your podcast name is 7 Words, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. That's right.
Yep. Yeah.
And so we'll go ahead and put that in the description for this video and in the show notes for the podcasts. So that's exciting. I was actually also in my early 40s when I got my graduate degree. I'm not a PhD like you are. And before that, my career was in accounting. So we have
Ah,
similar paths here.
yeah, both numbers people back in the day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because when numbers get so predictable and boring, we kind of deviate to the humans who are not so predictable, right? And I think that's part of what happens with people when they come into the office and they start saying like, "I can't believe what this person did, and I don't think I could ever forgive them,"
Mm,
or they have a spouse come into the office and say, I need you to tell Tracy about what you did, and then we'll have a couples therapy session, but you need to go in there. I mean, just like wild stuff, right? And it's not a cookie cutter approach, not like you can predict numbers, you cannot predict people. And that's what makes it crazy fun and a lot of really good healing that goes on in
mhm.
these offices and these spaces.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The book I wrote previous to this one actually relates to that that notion that yeah, cookie cutters don't work. Um, that phenomenon that gee, isn't it odd that we'll get training in some really neat set of ideas and clever approaches and techniques and things, and then we actually go and talk to real people. And I'll sometimes want to tell people, wait a minute, you're supposed to have read the book on how you're supposed to behave according to the training I just got, and you're not behaving that way. What's the matter here? Yeah,
Right.
real people don't always follow the same, whatever our precious ideas are. Well, the
Mhm.
subtitle of my previous book was Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And I point out that that applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too, which is to say, yeah, if you think you know it all, if you think you know exactly what's going on and you have the approach, you're probably going to do more harm than good. And
Possibly, yeah.
yeah.
So do you have a standard definition of the word betrayal? Just sort of like up your sleeve and
Yeah.
can present that because I think it probably can take a lot of different forms, correct?
Yes, it can definitely take lots of different forms, and I discuss that in the book because it's a natural question. It's like, what do you mean by betrayal? Occasionally I will have folks where one is saying they feel betrayed, and the other is saying, I don't think I betrayed you at all. Much more often, it's clear to both parties. What I mean by betrayal, and I don't, this isn't like a formal, careful formal definition, but basically, betrayal, first of all, is something big. It's not some small little annoyance. And what makes it a betrayal, a stranger can hurt you, but they can't betray you. What makes it a betrayal is the expectations you have of a particular relationship. And a spouse can betray you in ways that a friend can't, and vice versa, even in some ways. Well, probably not so much vice versa, but definitely, if you have the expectation, let's say, of sexual monogamy with the partner, and they go have sex with someone else, they have betrayed you in that sense.
Hmm.
And it's a betrayal to the very extent that you end up, the person who was betrayed ends up feeling like, wow, this is a person that I never would have thought would have done that based
Hmm.
on our relationship. And they did it.
Yeah, I see it kind of like when you were talking, I kind of saw it as we in our relationship are on a certain path and there's certain agreements that we have had. And then the one or the other persons, or even both people, go beyond those agreements. And that can be considered a betrayal. And in different roles, I was even thinking of employment, right? So if I'm working at a place, I'm just thinking about like when I used to work in the pharmacy and a grocery store, and if somebody, if somebody, one of my coworkers told somebody something that was false about me,
Hmm.
and then ended up getting me fired from my job or something, that would be considered a betrayal from a
Absolutely.
coworker.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're on a
Oh,
path.
yeah.
We're all supposed to be getting along and kumbayaing and everything, and then all of a sudden, a shift comes and it hurts the person. It hurts the
Yeah.
person that's being betrayed.
Yeah, and in fact, in my book, I have 12 example. I say couples, but they're not all like romantic couples. There's an example of brother and sister having issues. An example of a father and his adult daughter having. I mean, he ends up disinheriting her, and then she doesn't find out about it until he dies, and things of that sort. There's all sorts of different kind of relationships where betrayal can happen, and often does happen.
Hmm.
But what knits them all together is they're all big and they're all violations of those expectations of a relationship. That's
And
what makes
often, I guess, include lies and mistrust happens as a result of that, correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's It is the rule more than the exception that when there's some big breach of trust like that, there's probably been some lying or deception, or at least lying by omission going
Mhm.
on. Uh, and that's what often makes it so shocking.
So then when people come into your office for, say, a therapy session, and it has to do with one or both of the partners betraying each other, how does it usually flow, for you?
I do have a way I like to structure a first session that seems to keep working. People keep telling me it's helpful, and it leads people in a path that seems to then open up the possibilities for figuring out what to do. And it's only the first session that I structure like this. After that, I compare it to improv theater. It's sort of like, it's yes and. I mean, I'm the one providing the yes and. The typically the couple are not in yes and mode; they're in no damn it mode. Whatever the other is saying. But I'm just being curious as opposed to, saying, "Oh, that was terrible." I'm saying, "Well, maybe it was terrible." I mean, we can all agree it was terrible, but gee, what was going on? I'm into curiosity mode. Let's figure this out and follow the meaning where it goes. But the way I structure the first session is around an understanding. A lot of ways of doing this, but here's my favorite. There are ways of understanding, why do we couple, and what keeps people together? What keeps people wanting to be in a couple? One way of saying that is when there are two sets of needs that are being adequately fulfilled. And the reason I divide into two sets is the skills you need for one are very different from the skills you need for the other. In fact, they're somewhat in conflict. And yet, they're both needs. I'm using the word needs carefully. I'm not talking about desires. I mean things that, if they're not adequately fulfilled, something's not working and they end up in my office. So, what do I call the two sets? I call them stability and intimacy. And very often, I mean, in brief, stability is the stuff that's about keeping the anxiety level low. If there's been an affair, it's hugely destabilizing. The anxiety usually spikes. But many of the couples I work with, even if there has been an affair, many of the couples I work with, I would say most, are pretty good at stability. They more or less know how to avoid pushing buttons if they can, and they know how to keep things relatively stable so that they can run the house and take care of the kids and earn their livings and do whatever it is they need to do. Intimacy is a whole different thing. The skills of stability are about keeping the anxiety level low. Intimacy, and by all I mean by intimacy, is being fundamentally present and honest with yourself and each other. The skills of intimacy, or the chief skill of intimacy, is to tolerate anxiety rather than avoid it. And what tends to happen for many couples is, over time, they will, of course, prize stability, and they will not want to rock the boat too much, which makes sense. I mean, who would, it causes anxiety. So they won't bring up certain things. Something as simple as a complaint. They won't, if they've issued complaints before and it's tended to end up in a big fight or a deep freeze, they'll start to avoid it, and then they'll start resenting it. Or even not necessarily complaints, maybe things like fantasies, which could be in the sexual domain, but it could be in the more general life domain. Somebody has a fantasy of saying, "Oh, I have this dream that we could live overseas for 6 months," or something like that.
Mhm.
And they're worried to bring it up because they're worried, and certainly in the sexual domain, this happens a lot. They're worried their partner will think ill of them if they bring up some fantasy that they've had, and they're worried their partner will be really freaked out by it. So they don't. And what happens is, therefore, intimacy gets compromised. And my whole thesis is, intimacy is every bit as much of a need as stability. And when a couple doesn't have, when intimacy is compromised, something happens and it becomes destabilizing. And my favorite metaphor is, you think of a plant that's, seed that's planted in soil, and it starts to grow. And then somebody comes along and paves a sidewalk over it. Why would they pave a sidewalk? Well, they want stability. It makes it easier to walk on. What is that plant going to do? It's going to try and crack the sidewalk. And a lot of the couples that are dealing with betrayal, one way of understanding what the heck happened is, basically the couple was trying to crack the sidewalk, one or the other or both. It couldn't tolerate a lack of intimacy, and so someone became vulnerable to an affair, or someone got really depressed because it feels really deadening when that happens, or somebody just, without warning, just said, "I want out, I'm done," because they were never able to bring it up before. All of those things are possible symptoms, or sometimes they're fighting over everything and everything, anything and everything, except what they really need to actually have an argument about, except what they
Mhm.
really disagree about, because that's too scary. So all of those, that's basically how I structure a first session. And that whole business occupies the first 15, 20 minutes. And then after that, I say it's like improv. Okay, what do people do with that? Typically, I will see a lot of light bulbs happening then. People will say, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. And they'll start to recognize the ways in which perhaps they've been, you know, prizing stability at the expense of intimacy. And maybe that's what led to what happened.
And then the treatment goal then, or the goals are, and to be able to assess the levels of intimacy and stability, and to be able to increase both. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, when it works. Now, I I don't think it should be it should not be up to me. It should be up to the therapist to decide what's working and what's not working. In fact, my first question, my opening question after my little confidentiality speech about what I have to report to the authorities, that sort of thing, after the exceptions and all that. After that, my very opening question, and I always say it, I always say it this way. Here's my favorite opening question, which I like to say it that way because that implies there's a lot of ways of thinking about this. I don't have a monopoly on it, but here's my favorite. How will you know if this is helping? Right from the get go, I want them to focus on, okay, you get to decide if it's helping, and you might give that a lot of thought all the way along. How will you know? And that'll, also focus them on what does better look like. So that question, what does better look like, isn't so simple when you're dealing with a couple. Yeah, I don't
Mhm.
even think it's simple when you're dealing with an individual, but it's especially not with a couple because there are three different opinions flying around at least among the three people involved, including me, and
Yeah.
mine being the least important. But I've worked with couples where one has considered the work a great success because they realized they need to split up and they proceeded to do that. And the other one is feeling like, oh my God, I was hoping this would save our relationship and it didn't. And they're feeling it was an abject failure. And I have sympathy for both of those assessments.
Mhm.
But in general, what I consider a success is if they get to a point of clarity where they can decide what they want to do with integrity and dignity and as humanely as they can. And often that means splitting up, not always, of course. My heart sings when they stay together. I tell people I have a bias toward helping people stay together. I like it better, but that doesn't put any obligations on them. But it can also be a success when they realize, oh my God, we're two good people. We can continue to be good to ourselves and our children, but we better not try and stay together because it's not going to work.
Mhm. Well, and in that, it becomes more stable as well,
Yeah.
because you don't want an unstable set of parents when there's children involved. Do you have a theory about why betrayal even happens? Like, why do people betray each other? Like, why can't we just be good to each other?
The most of the folks I work with are saying things like, I never would have thought in a million years I'd be cheating on my partner, or I never would have thought in a million years that if my partner cheated, I'd be here trying to work on the relationship.
Right?
And those situations are the ones where, I'm sure I'm over. I'll say this to people, when what you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that proverb.
Yeah.
I have my favorite way of thinking about it. So I keep thinking about it that way.
Mm.
But those are the situations where I tend to think, yeah, they're vulnerable to that because intimacy is a need.
Mhm.
And that if intimacy is compromised, and they may not even be consciously aware of it, but what will tend to happen, and there's research on this, they'll ask people, how did what was the steps that led you to cheat? And it'll often be a sort of sequence of thoughts about some anger, some resentment. There is a fuck you element to it often,
Mhm.
and a sense of entitlement as well. It's like, well, she's not going to care, or he's not going to care, whatever. I get to do this, and they'll often, again, those same folks will often feel horribly guilty when they do it. But there's lots of ways that they get led into it. But again, my favorite way is yeah, problems in the intimacy realm broadly.
Mhm.
And when they can, so what that suggests by way of going forward is when they can actually face that, when they can actually recognize, oh, wow, I hadn't even realized I felt this way, but I've been feeling that way for a long time. They have a shot at at least understanding each other better. There's I feel like a bad Borscht Belt comic. I have a shtick. One of my shticks is what I call the oh shit moment. I'm just, the language is okay on your
Of
podcast.
course, yeah. Yeah, we say
Just
shit and
checking.
fuck and everything
I was
like
on
that.
one the other day where it wasn't clear that I should have said that, but anyway. So
Okay.
the oh shit moment, and what I mean by the oh shit moment, it's not oh shit, I just hit my thumb with a hammer, not that one. It's the oh shit moment that says, oh shit, that's what's going. No wonder this is hard. I'm
Mhm.
getting it now. I see why you feel that way. And of course, the reason I call it the oh shit moment rather than the aha moment, aha moment is, we've got it. We've got a solution. This is great. And that's lovely. And that's great when it happens. But the oh shit moment, and I'm dramatizing it, of course, it's not really a moment, but that process happens when people start seeing, oh my God, you're not crazy, are you? You're not crazy, evil, or stupid,
Mhm.
nor am I. And we
Mhm.
still have this difference. I wonder what happens now. And when you can do that, and that it's often a moment of considerable anxiety. It feels dangerous. It feels like, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to work. But if you can do that and not freak out, then that's when creativity can happen. That's when people will think thoughts they wouldn't have thought before. It's moments of intimacy. Intimate conversation is what brings about that growth.
Yeah, and I think maybe with the "oh shit" moment too, it's more like if you, it's not about finding the solution like the aha moment, but it's more like getting really clear about what the problem is and what
Yeah.
the issue is and being very much more aware of it and having that clarity.
Yeah.
So then when you see people in your office, do you ever see anybody who's done different kinds of betrayal that aren't so common? Like we've been talking about intimacy and sexual betrayal. But what about financial betrayal? Have you had any incidents of that walking into
Absolutely.
your office? That's getting a little bit more and more common.
Yeah, it is. Well, I don't know if it's more common than it used to be, but I've certainly, I mean, in 30 years, I'm sure early on in my practice, I was encountering that already. It's often in the form of somebody who is often it's not necessarily like a gambling problem. Sometimes it's that sort of thing. Sometimes it's somebody who has been managing the finances and doesn't want to tell their partner they're in trouble, and they
Mhm.
think they can get out of it, and they get in deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they spring it on the partner. I had
Mhm.
a couple I worked with a number of years ago where the guy was an accountant like your old field, for a company, and failed to file taxes for several years and
Oh
didn't
my God.
tell the owners and didn't tell his wife,
Oh my
and
God.
then got in serious trouble and might have, there was some worry, was he financially liable for some of this? Had it been that, he was saying, no, he didn't steal any of the money, he just failed to account for it properly. That wasn't 100% clear. And the wife was trying to figure out, what else don't I know about him? Again, feeling massively betrayed all of a sudden, with the prospect of losing their house and losing their assets. And
Exactly.
yeah, I have encountered that before.
Yeah, and I think I can remember one where there was a gambling problem, and it was in the triple digits that this
Uh,
person was in debt or credit card or withdrawing money, and in this case it was a female, and she just could not. It was like almost a compulsion, and when the husband found out about it, he marched her right into my office for some reason. I really don't know whatever happened to her, but I do remember being just completely breathtaking with the amount of
yeah.
money. And because
Yeah.
then that means you've got to put a mortgage on. You got to like either sell your house or take out a second mortgage, or you just kind of let it stand there and let the debt collectors come or whatever. But it's so frightening. And the partner on the other end is so vulnerable because
Yeah.
when you're married, especially well, at least in this is a community property state, you're liable for half of that debt.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It is really horrendous. And,
Yeah.
now of course that's gotten a lot worse with the sports betting apps they make it so simple to be, right there on your phone anytime, day and night, betting on practically anything. And I was just reading some articles about that in the past couple of weeks. There were some articles talking about how the business model, they won't admit it, of course, but the business model of the companies that set up those sports books is to encourage compulsive gambling.
Mm.
they're lying to themselves and basically saying, no, that isn't. But if you look at how they operate, that is precisely what they are doing. And they make most of their money from people who are losing massive amounts of money and usually can't afford to do so.
Well, so we've talked about the sexual betrayal, and I briefly touched on a workplace situation, and then financial. What other types of betrayal are there? How other? Not like we want to teach people how to betray each other, but I just want to
We
know
don't
what
have
walking
to.
into your office. It does, now that we're talking, seem so much more clear. This that I trusted you with something, and this trust that I gave you was not honored,
Yeah.
and that really puts it into a little bit more perspective for me. I mean, I could even say that I trust you, Walker, that's going down my street right now, that your dog will not shit on my driveway, and if the dog does, that you will pick it up. And if the dog owner does not pick it up, is that betrayal? No, I don't know.
Well,
Maybe
in
bad
that sense, you could
manners.
you could define it that way. You could, because there's a social expectation and they're violating the expectation. I'm old enough to remember before there were, pooper scooper laws. So
Yeah.
when I grew up, there was dog shit all over the place. I remember.
We used to pick it up and throw it at each other, actually.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I remember when I was really little, picking it up and it had dried, and I thought it was chalk. I remember my
sometimes.
older brothers freaking out when they saw me doing that. But no, you could say it's a betrayal. I mean, I usually reserve betrayal for things that are
A big
large, but it is
yeah.
so interesting. There's another category which I also mentioned. I think I mentioned it briefly. The family cutoffs. I'm not talking about spouses, but between parents and adult kids.
Mm,
Super common, and there are whole now naturally there are whole Facebook groups and websites and all that sort of thing devoted to telling people how to cut off your troublesome parents.
oh my goodness. Well,
And
it goes the
that
other way too.
oh
The
yeah,
parents
yeah.
can cut off the kids as well.
Oh, absolutely, they can. And more, and then there are the folks. We've interviewed a couple, two different people on our podcast over the years. We've been doing the podcast now for 5 years, and two different authors who've written about ways of trying to reestablish that connection. And it's interesting, the stories they were telling. A guy named Carl Pillemer wrote a book a few years ago. He's a sociologist at Cornell, and he has done a study of family cutoffs in the United States. And he found that at any given time, and it was really his research methodology I found fascinating as an old statistician, especially. He found that at any given time in the United States, roughly 1 in 4 people are currently going through some kind of family cutoff. Not
Mm,
talking about divorce, but
one in
talking about some
four.
sort of family cutoff. 1 in 4 currently. That's not like ever, but currently.
Yeah.
So it's a super common phenomenon. Now it's a fairly broad definition because he includes like parents and siblings and like close cousins, people who you were close to. And what happens is somebody gets to the point in saying, no more. That's it. We're done. And
Mhm.
the ways people are able to repair that breach, sometimes after decades, are fascinating. He found a subset of people who were able to repair it. And it was really interesting because you don't usually find this in social science research. Every single person in his sample of people who had at least attempted reconciliation, and I think he had like a sample of 100 people who had attempted reconciliation, every single one said they were glad they had tried. Nobody regretted trying. They didn't all succeed, but even the ones who didn't succeed said, it was worth a try. They felt better for trying. And the ones who succeeded, often what would happen is they realized they don't need the apology they thought they needed. They just give up on that. It's been, as I say, in some cases, decades. They're saying, you know what? I never mind the apology. How you doing? It's been decades. And if the other person is willing to say, sure, they'll reconnect, and sometimes just very superficially, be very careful, and they won't go anywhere about the past. It'll just be what you've been up to for the last 30 years. And then when the ice has been broken, not always, but often, one or the other would say, after some time, one or the other would say, I've been meaning to tell you, I really think I was an asshole 30 years ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was that way. And the other one will say, you know what, I was too, or whatever. Sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes it won't.
Mm.
But just the fact that they could do that, I find it really inspiring that it is possible these things that people say that this we can never heal this breach. It turns out it can. I'll mention in one other category that occurs to me,
Okay.
which I also find interesting. One of the examples in my book, because this I've had numbers of people. All the examples in my book are composites, of course, for
Mhm.
confidentiality's sake.
Yeah.
But I've had numbers of people in this particular one where I think in all cases it was a woman who had been sexually abused as a child. I think in most of the cases I've dealt with by her father, and her
Mhm.
father's still living, still with her mother. And she wants to stay in touch with them, even though she is long since, we're talking about adults now. The folks, I think the example I give in my book is somebody like in her 50s or something, dealing with her now elderly parents. And she had never told her husband why she tended to be sort of distant from her parents. And as her parents developed more needs, she would go frequently and visit. Well, her husband, finally, she admitted to her husband one time that I think the story was she was watching a TV show that involved sexual abuse and she started to cry. And her husband asked her about it. And she finally, after having been married for 20 years, whatever, said to her husband, "That happened to me. It was my father." And her husband basically went apeshit because he couldn't
Yeah.
handle her staying in touch with her father.
Mhm.
And it was fascinating. And so the husband felt betrayed
Yeah.
because she hadn't been honest. She felt betrayed because of her husband's response. Instead of being supportive, he was apeshit.
Yeah.
And of course, there was a sense of betrayal from her father originally, and she was trying to balance all of these forces. It's really fascinating.
The trifecta of betrayals. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. I think we've pretty much covered most of them, and or if not all of them. But I think what we could probably surmise is that it's usually something really big, and it could also be death by a thousand paper cuts. Right. Just
Yes.
over time, these little microaggressions happening, and then all of a sudden, it's like no more.
Yeah.
This is just too much, and I can't take it anymore.
Hmm.
So, well, then what is the solution? You and your wife
Well,
have a podcast and you've written some books. What do we do with these betrayers? And if we're on that end of being hurt?
yes. So the title of my book that I wrote about it is Betrayal and Forgiveness. So the solution is forgiveness. Now I make that sound like, oh, no big deal. Snap your fingers and just forgive and you'll be fine, which is nonsense. That's not how it works. But what I mean by forgiveness, well, let me start with what I don't mean by forgiveness. What I don't mean is saying, oh, it was no big deal, or
Letting
just
it
ignoring
go,
it,
forgetting about it, right?
forgetting about it. Oh, forgive and forget.
Hmm.
Complete bullshit. It is. If you literally have forgotten about it, there's nothing to forgive. It's no, there's no harm there. You know that experience.
It's
I
not a
didn't have this
problem.
myself, but I've heard of people having this experience. I think my wife had one similar to this actually. She went to a high school reunion decades later, and somebody apologized to her for being so terrible to her in high school. She had no memory of it, whatever. It's
Hmm.
like she wasn't going around carrying that grudge. It's like she forgot about it. It wasn't a big deal to her. This person was feeling terribly guilty for having been sort of a jerk.
But
Interesting.
forgiveness is not just forgetting it, but forgiveness
No,
is not also does not mean reconciliation, that we have to like, when we
exactly.
forgive somebody, it's really for us and not for them, right?
Precisely. It's an inside job. Forgiveness, I didn't make up that phrase, but I like it. Forgiveness is an inside job.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it's for yourself. It has almost nothing to do with the person you're forgiving. It's letting go of the obsession. Or another way of saying it is it's processing the trauma
Mhm.
so that you're no longer in a panic whenever you think about it.
Yeah.
It'll never be a pleasant memory, but it's something when you get to the point of what I call forgiveness, it means you can think about it and it's like, well, that sucked, but I'm okay now. Now
Mhm.
what do I do?
Yeah.
So that's not so easy to get there, especially in someone with whom you do have an ongoing relationship and want to perhaps continue it.
Mhm.
So forgiveness is, if you're going to want to stay with someone and want to learn, not only that, but learn to trust them again, forgiveness is something of a prerequisite to that. If you can't forgive them, you're going to be in a panic whenever you think about them, or you're going to be triggered so often, it's going to be very difficult to stay in a relationship. So forgiveness is a really important process, and that involves, I talk about 3 steps, which is always kind of some clever author says 3 steps, take it with a grain of salt, not that simple. But I call it, first step is forgive yourself, which means getting to that point of recognizing, you know what, you're doing the best you could. You couldn't prevent it. You can beat yourself up all you like, but you only knew what you knew. You're not crazy. You're not stupid. You're not evil. You just, stuff happens. And
Mhm.
then forgive whoever hurt you is a pretty short step from that because basically and this is often a stretch, but they were doing the best they could too. And people will say, "What do you mean? How can you say they're doing the best they could? That lying jerk that cheated on me." Well, no, they weren't doing a good thing. But given who they were and given the resentments they had, and given the context, like
The
you said, it's all
context,
about
yeah.
context. You can say, well, shit, I wish you hadn't been like that, but you were, and I guess that's who you were, and so you did that. I mean, I'll just have to accept you did it. I'm not going to approve of it, but I can accept it. That's forgiveness. And the
Mhm.
third step, I give it a funny name because you don't have to be religious at all to appreciate this. I call it forgive God,
Mm.
which is to say, okay, you can forgive yourself, you can forgive whoever hurt you. You also have to forgive the fact that this kind of shit happens.
Yeah, someone's supposed to be watching out for you, and where were they,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, come on, why does this happen? Well, because it does. Because the grand scheme of things is way bigger than all of us, and shit happens sometimes,
Yeah,
and it's part of the deal. And the more you can accept that with grace, the better off you'll be. And another word I use for accepting that with grace is faith. And again, I
mhm,
don't mean necessarily religious faith. I just mean accepting that the reality is right to be what it is, even
yeah,
when it sucks. It's like, well, yeah, people have to be able to betray each other. The theologian's general answer to the problem of theodicy, how could a good God let bad things happen to good people, is free will. They'll say, well, if we didn't have free will, none of this would work. And they
yeah,
got a point. It's like, well, yeah, we're capable of doing shit, so occasionally we will.
yeah. Wow.
So that's how you can get to forgiveness, but that often takes time. And I point out in the book and in my work with people, if you're in a situation where you're still being hurt, that's not the time to forgive. That's the time to be pissed. That's the time
Mhm.
to be obsessed with it if you have to be, so you'll get out.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I see it as being on a path to where it's like, I choose to let go of this energy that I'm holding because of what you did to me, and I either want to make the relationship better again, or I am choosing to leave it. But you're
yes,
right. If you continue to get that whatever it was, and it continues to happen over and over and over, it may not be safe for you to stay
right,
emotionally, physically, financially, in all of the life domains.
yeah,
So I think that's kind of the way I see it. But either way, forgiveness is going to entail you letting go of that energy
yeah.
for your own good, because you don't want to be carrying that stuff around.
Well, precisely, it frees you, and then you can consider, okay, what about the most frequent example I see, spouses and somebody's cheated. That's the one I see a lot.
Yeah.
What do you do then? Well, is it what you're going to need to figure out? And this takes both parties. This is not an inside job. Jointly, you're going to jointly and individually, they're going to have to figure out, can I trust this person? And it's really interesting because the person who did the cheating has a trust problem too. They're going to have to be able to trust that the other person cannot hate them. They're going to have to be able to trust that the other person can view them as a decent person, even having hurt them that way. That's
And they have
often
to
a
trust
tall
them.
order.
They have to trust themselves too, right? Like
Also
that
true.
they're going
Yes.
to hold themselves to a responsibility or accountability to honor their partner and their partner's wishes. They're going to have to trust that they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And neither partner wants to be in a relationship where one of them is the permanent villain and the other is the permanent probation officer. That is
Yeah,
not a relationship most folks want to be in.
yeah, yeah. No,
And
I
so rebuilding trust is a whole other thing, but that often has to follow both parties learning to forgive.
mm,
Because and like you were saying before, it's context. When you can understand the context, when you can follow that meaning wherever it goes, even when it's painful or seems like, well, that was wrong. Well, yeah, it was wrong, but this is what was happening. When you can do that, that's what allows people to start developing the kind of understanding that trust can flow from. Wow. And you know what people will say when they've gone through that process? Often will say, I've never heard anybody say, hey, thanks for cheating. Haven't heard that one. But I have often heard people say things to the effect of, hey, you know what? We apparently, when I look back, we were headed for a crisis. We didn't know it. So thanks for precipitating a crisis. Apparently we needed it. Look how much better off we are now. And
yeah, and
they're grateful for it.
I think it was Dr. John Deloney, and he probably didn't actually make this up, but he's the big YouTuber guy, and talks about relationships a lot. Anyway, he said something to the effect of, when a betrayal happens or somebody cheats on the relationship will never be the same again.
Yes.
However, you can build it back up to be something different and
Yes, and better than it was.
better. Yeah,
Because
it could definitely more functional than it was, right?
yeah, because look where look where it led before, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is often what happens. Yeah, the folks who stay together are often really grateful, not merely because they survived the crisis, but because the crisis made things better. Now, again, I don't go around recommending infidelity as a way to save your marriage. Not a good plan.
So
Usually doesn't
that's
work.
kind of a hard path to go on. I mean, there's easier ways, folks. I mean, everybody out
Yes.
there, yeah, there's easier ways.
Yeah. But it, you
Wow.
know, but it does sometimes have that effect.
Yeah, yeah. And who could have thought that, we can learn something. There was probably a problem anyway that needed to be revealed. We don't want to carry this energy anymore. And so it is very freeing. It sounds like in your book that you try and teach people a little bit more about how to let go and really see things in context. I've had some people saying, "Oh, I could never ever forgive that," and then
Yes.
they hear the context and they're like, "Oh, yeah, it seems kind of understandable, right?"
Oh, those people are often in my office. I mean, they're saying, if you had asked me a month ago before I found out about this, would I stay with my partner if he or she cheated? I would have said, no, of course not. And there they are sitting there trying to stay together because they're realizing they don't want to lose what they had. And they're starting to get an inkling, oh, there is a context here, even if it's painful.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that it leads to growth. I mean, growth is painful
Yeah,
sometimes.
good stuff. Well, so I'm going to give your website out because your website has a lot of really good information on it. And so this is a Bruce, BruceChalmer, one more word.com. So for those of you who can't see it on the screen, you're listening to it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. That's what it is. Go on there. And I think that's where you can find your book, correct? All
Absolutely. You
right.
can find my books and also information about my practice. If people want to work with me, they can do it through that. It's all telehealth now.
Yeah.
And also, you can get a link there that will take you to the podcast. The podcast website has its own website, ctn7.com.
Yes.
CTNIN.
Oh,
Not
CTIN?
IN7. Yeah,
Oh, 7.
CTIN7. Yeah, CTN7. If it stands for Couples Therapy in 7, it's the number 7. Couples Therapy in 7 Words is the name of the podcast. The 7 words, by the way, are be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's the 7 words. You have to count and to get 7. Yeah,
Oh, I
because
was like, that sounded like 6 to
it's
me.
only 6. Yeah, you have to count and. It's like
Right.
what's Smokey the Bear's middle name? Anyway,
I'll
you have to
remember.
count and because 7's a better. I'm Jewish and 7's a lucky number. So
You would never have thought I was a bean counter before. I totally missed that and. Yes, 7
there you
words.
go. Yes.
So it's
Well, it is three principles in 7 words. But the point of that is it's really be kind in the sense of be kin, recognize that sense of kinship. Don't panic because you can't be kind if you're in panic. And faith, as I described it, is the antidote to panic. So that's how it fits together. But yeah, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. So that's where CTN, yes, I see you've got it corrected there, ctn7.com.
Yeah,
Is
yeah. So then you can go to this website, CTIN7, number 7, .com, and you can see all the podcast episodes there, right?
absolutely. You can, yeah. I think the audio versions of all the episodes are there, and there's a link there to I think where the videos have been going is mostly on my blog, although I've started putting it on Substack now. So
Oh, yeah,
but
a lot of
anyway,
people are doing Substack. Yeah, and
yeah,
I saw that when I looked at your list, I saw my old friend, Jack Hammer, who has been on this show before. I love that
yeah, he was
name,
on
by the
ours
way.
too.
He's an amazing guy, and you had interviewed him too. I love that. So,
Yeah,
well, awesome. Is there any other thing, product or service you'd like to talk about? Again, I'm going to put the links in the description for the video and the show notes for the podcast. But if there's any other social media sites you want to put up there, just let me know, and we can do that now.
sure. Yeah, it's. I mean, I do have a Facebook presence. Dr. Bruce Chalmer, Dr. Bruce Chalmer, is on
Okay,
Facebook. But really, the brucechalmer.com is the place to go, and it'll kind of take you for any information about the stuff that I do. That's probably the best bet.
great. Well, awesome. I appreciate your work, and I hope this has benefited people just to understand what betrayal is, because a lot of people are complaining about other people and the betrayals, either if they're microaggressions or big, big things. I think that people can learn to get along together. And at least if they can't stay together, at least they can let go of the energy that the betrayal has had on them and in the, in the pursuit of mental wellness, I guess, right?
Indeed, yes, and well, finding peace in a chaotic world. That's your brand, and it is all about
Exactly.
that. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you and the work that you and your wife do with the podcast. And you take care and
You too.
be
Thank you
safe
so much.
out there.
Yeah.
Don't let that dog shit on your driveway. Thanks for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also go to www.calmingthechaospodcast.com to listen to all Calming the Chaos podcast episodes. I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.